Hey, everybody. It's Brandon back again with Scholar Talks. And I am joined today by a former colleague of mine and a person that I would definitely call a scholar in the field of playwright and knowing how to both write and teach plays. And I want to introduce you to Ms. Teri Foltz. And so I want Teri to take a few minutes and talk about her background and her life and her experiences as a teacher, as working with pre-service teachers at the university level, but also as a playwright herself. And maybe she has something to say about stand-up comedy. I don't know. I'll invite her if she wants to. But Teri, take it away. This is all about you. Introduce yourself to everybody.
Okay, hi, I'm Teri Foltz. Uh, I retired 11 years ago. That's going to be hard for Brandon to imagine. 11 years ago, I taught for 32 years, high school English. Taught AP English, I think, for probably about 17 years, I'm thinking. I also taught drama and directed plays at the high school where Brandon and I taught. As soon as I retired, I joined a writing group here around Cincinnati and began taking my own writing really seriously. So I've published 2 books of poetry and many plays, many short plays, which are on YouTube under Teri's Playdate. That's what I did during the pandemic, because I asked all my actor friends to read my plays for me. And then I've written 2 full-length plays that have had productions, and I'm working on a 3rd one now. So, and I'm really enjoying the whole robust life of retirement, which, I'm the light at the end of Brandon's tunnel there. He can look at that and say, yeah,
Absolutely.
that'll be me one day.
Absolutely. I love it. And just to think about living a life of letters like you have,
Oh,
Teri, is just, I mean, you are doing it. And that's just so wonderful to know. And I did not know about the short plays that you had done. So I'm going to have to look into that for sure. And as I mentioned earlier, Teri has performed as a stand-up comedian. And was known for even taking her classes to some stand-up comedy every now and
I
then.
did. I did do
So
that.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And I remember,
Probably wouldn't get away with a lot of things I did
oh, that's okay. That's
today.
okay. So, but I'm absolutely delighted. And so, if you all watching are familiar with Scholar Talks, then you know how this works. But just a brief little background on what we do here. I invite people who are scholars in the field of literature in some way to come on and suggest something that they think would be a great text in a high school literature classroom and talk about what it is about that text that makes it especially teachable, why it's important maybe that text be taught. And so when I reached out to Teri, it didn't take Teri much time to come up with hers. And she pretty quickly suggested the Arthur Miller that most people don't teach, and that is All My Sons. Now, Teri, I was not really familiar with this play. I'd heard about it, but I had not read it. I'd not studied it. So I quickly ordered it and and I read it without any context at all. I didn't even read the back. And it it was tragic. We're allowed spoilers here. So, but it
Okay.
just struck me how tragic it was. And is that something that draws you to this book or the way that it gets to that tragedy?
Well, I'd say as much as I loved doing stand-up comedy when I did it, I'm always drawn to more dramatic works when I read. Um, Not much for comedic plays. I do write comedic plays, short plays, but uh, when I write a full-length play, I always have to have some kind of pathos to match the comedy or the jovial parts of the play. So I always look for a really strong message, and those usually come out in tragedies, um, more so than any other. I know that you're going to ask me. I'm just going to go ahead and answer why. Why was this my choice?
You're
And
right. It's like you knew that was the next
yeah, I
question.
just knew. And and I'd like to start out by saying that uh, if teachers are meant to inspire students to think, this play will make them think. And they will not think the same way. There'll be a lot of debate in the classroom. I learned when I taught it. Um, there is so much to talk about. You can talk about family, you can talk about secrets, you can talk about secrets you have from your family. Um, and and it's a lot about cheating and lying to yourself. And I'm gonna this you might disagree with this, but I think that the largest group of liars in the world are teenagers. And they have to lie because there so many people are micromanaging them, and they're trying so hard to be independent that it just tends to end up with they tell little fibs about what their life's all about. But if there's one group of people that are so intolerant of liars, it's teenagers. Their favorite three words are "that's not fair." They want everything to be just and fair and true. They don't want to ever think that their parents would lie to them. They lose their friends over lying and cheating in their groups of friends. They're very judgmental of lies, even though if they had to admit it, they are liars themselves. So I think that kind of catches them. That kind of brings them into this story about how you can tell a lie for so long you actually start to believe it yourself. Another side issue is why I like to teach this was it gets them talking to the older generation about what life was like. Now, there's not, I mean, their grandparents probably did not live through World War II. My parents did, but their parents probably heard a lot about it from their parents, and their grandparents probably heard from their parents, but they could still tell a pretty accurate tale of what the 40s were like. And I've always been totally obsessed with what the home front was like during the war, because the home front certainly was different when I was growing up and we were talking about the Vietnam War. And so my mom would talk about, how she would take her pots and pans to the city building to be melted, so that they could make airplane parts, and how she and her friends would make all these sandwiches and go to the train station in Cincinnati and hand sandwiches out to the soldiers. I mean, even people who get really upset about today's world and politics today, and they always say, well, what can you do? Well, they had a whole different mindset back there. They did a lot, even though the war was far away. They did a lot on the home front. And I don't think that teenagers might not know all that. And I think they might find that really interesting. And especially where this play is concerned, that many factories were taken over by the military to make parts, airplane parts, and to make military equipment. And it was very profitable for the factory owners. Sometimes I read that the government would actually build a factory and then just hand it to an owner and tell them what to make and guarantee their profits. So, I mean, it was lucrative in many ways for the people who were working back home.
One of the things that you touch on here was the 1940s and the context of this. And after I read the play, and then I went and started doing some reading about the play and watched 3 different performances of it on YouTube, including the movie from the 40s, which was really well done, but did not follow the script exactly like some of the plays that I saw did. We're touching on this idea of the text and the author in relation to the context where it was written. So, people may know about Arthur Miller and, what he was trying to say with the Crucible and things like that. But what else about this relationship to that time period, this text, Miller himself, do we need to know, you think?
Well, first of all, I like to teach it because I like for students to know that he wrote more than the Crucible. Because the Crucible always gets taught. And yet, in high school, they probably will end up reading 3 Shakespearean plays, but only 1 Arthur Miller. And that's always the Crucible, maybe Death of a Salesman. But I think that this play, All My Sons, was most important to Miller himself. I think he wrote this play in order to make a difference. he wanted to shine the light on the war profiteers, and he really wanted to wake up America to what was happening, and he felt like he had a message, a very strong message when he wrote this. He wrote it when he was 28, so he was very idealistic. And he never fought in the war, in battle, because he had a football injury from college. You know, he hurt his knee, and so and back then, if you couldn't go to war, there was a shame involved in that, because everybody wanted to do their part. And his brother did. His brother went into the service, and he came back a broken man. And also Miller's parents, his father was, victimized by the stock market crash. He lost everything he thought he would leave to his sons, just like Joe in the play. He thought he would be leaving this great business to his sons. He lost everything and never regained any of it. And so, I think that Miller could just really relate to what happens, when you have a responsibility to your family. You also have a responsibility to the world and into your community. So I think he would pick this as his best play.
So I love that thought of a writer doing something, or an artist. Let's just consider, playwrights as the artists that they are, as a writer, as an artist, doing something out of their seeming obligation to their family, themselves, their society. So what I'm taken by is, at least one source I was reading was saying that because of the themes of this play, Miller was investigated by the McCarthy Commission.
Oh yeah.
And
that's another thing that will fascinate teenagers.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
American Acts. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead if you want to spin on that.
Well, people had two choices. They could either turn in their friends, or they could refuse to turn in their friends, and then they would be held in contempt of Congress. So, and Miller was in that second group. He wasn't going to turn in anybody because he didn't think it was anybody's business. And so he was convicted. He didn't go to jail, but he was arrested for, acts of communism. And that was really important, I think, to him. I didn't read that it was about this play, but so many people in Hollywood were investigated. And I guess it's because that's where a lot of liberals ended up, and storytellers in that way. So yeah, that was quite tragic.
Yeah. And just thinking about, if it was this play and other things that would lead to that, and that gives us the Crucible. I mean, it's almost interesting to think, like, we don't have the Crucible if we don't have this play. And
this was his second play that he wrote, and his first one was a huge flop.
Yeah, I did read that too.
But I loved his first one. I've read a lot of his plays, but I love The Man Who Had All the Luck. That was his first one, a big flop on Broadway.
Yeah, I'd seen that. I've not read that either, but I'd seen that it had flopped, and I was interested that he wrote that. It blows my mind how something like that could flop, but then you end up with something as complex as this. It's not just poignant and tragic. It's complex.
Oh, very complex.
As short as it is, there's like, I had to draw myself a chart. It's complex in a good way, but I had to draw myself a chart of the characters to understand, okay, this is who Annie is to this person. This is who, just to make sure I understood.
Right.
But for some reason, the book I have doesn't have a dramatis personae in the front either. So I was figuring it out as I went.
Yeah, you were figuring out as you read.
Right.
And because those characters change, Anne used to be the next door neighbor, but now she's not, and they have new neighbors who play a part. Yeah.
And the fact that the new neighbors knew, or
they all knew.
They knew.
The whole town knew.
And of course, the old neighbors, Steve Deaver, couldn't know, or did know, but I mean, he couldn't be the neighbor anymore. And I mean, that whole web, it was so Shakespearean in its way, how everybody was connected.
Very much so. Tragic in that way. Absolutely.
Yeah. So what about to our context, you think? I mean, there's so many ways we could go off on this with like politically or socially,
Hmm.
but you're thinking about this play as a teacher of it, as a playwright yourself, or maybe even what you think Miller would think about this play in relation to our context.
Right. And it's really all about choices. And I love talking to teenagers about choices and decisions. I don't know whether you read in your when you read some scholarship, but I read about the law of unintended consequences.
Mm,
Did you read that?
no, I did not see that.
This is a great, I mean, I never put it in with these words, but it's interesting that everything has a consequence. Everything does. It's either the consequence that you expected or it's unintended benefits. You thought, oh wow, that
Yeah.
was cool, that happened. Or unintended drawbacks, which you didn't expect to have happen. Or the third one is perverse results,
Mm.
which
Mm.
means that just the opposite of what you wanted to happen happened.
Is that cosmic irony? I mean, is
Yeah.
that?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I've never seen that broken down that way as much as we've talked about, and I say we because me and you talking about this as colleagues, the consequences, the cause and effect of literature.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so much so, but I love this idea of the perverse results and what a playwright or a writer can do with that. And I totally
Yeah.
see that working
And
through here.
the fact that Joe Keller, the father, claims that he did it all for his sons and he loses both of them.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the perverse, the opposite of what he wanted.
Yeah.
And of
Now,
course, he always says he did it for his sons, but I personally think he did it for greed and to save face. I
yeah,
think his ego and his greed was really, it's always nice to say you did it for your family. And I think even teenagers would recognize that some workaholic fathers say, well, I'm doing it to support my family, but then they never see their fathers because their
right.
fathers are always working.
Yeah. Yeah. I can, as as the son of a father who was blue collar, but traveled all the time myself.
Mm-hmm.
And, he worked on the railroad. And for the time when my father was working where we grew up, fairly rural Eastern Kentucky, um, that was a job to have. It was a union job, guaranteed work,
Yes.
great benefits, everything else. We never saw him. But, I've encountered people once, especially once I got to college, who never saw their father, and their father didn't have a job like mine. Like he came home, he had a job at home, but he was working like their father
All
would
the
be
time.
working constantly.
Right.
And that was something I never could square
Yes.
as a person,
Yes.
who, when he was home, we got to spend some time with him when he wasn't sleeping. So I totally see what you're saying there in my
Mm-hmm.
connection to it.
Right.
Um,
Right.
what you said something though that caught me. um, it's one of those things that you think about and you Google it because you're like, okay, there's no way that I'm the first one to think about this, and I wasn't. But the idea that the all my sons is not just the sons; it's the pilots on the planes too,
Yes. Yes.
and how Joe saw himself as he was blaming himself for the murders of or the deaths of those
Those
boys.
21 pilots. Yeah, they were all his sons,
Yeah,
and he finally comes to realize that at the end, and then he can't handle the realization.
yeah. And then I found out this would be the thing that you put in a footnote. Then I found out that the band, the contemporary band 21 Pilots, gets their name from
I
this
did
play.
not know
I
that.
know. I know. Yeah, it
Oh,
was
wow, that's cool.
I know, yeah. Just happened to come across that. So it was interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So so what do you think is easy to miss in this
Well,
play?
I
And
want
I've
to go
already talked
back
about how
for a second
complex it is. Oh, go ahead.
and
Yeah, go for it.
I want to talk about how it appeals to us, like what is a parallel in our lives.
Yeah.
And I remember not that long ago about the celebrity who went to jail because she had somebody else write her daughter's essay,
Mm-hmm.
and they and paid extra money in order to get her accepted into college.
Yeah, the
And
big
I thought,
college admission scandal from about 4 or 5 years
yes,
ago.
that whole
Yeah.
thing, right.
Mm-hmm.
And I would ask the teenagers, my students, I would ask them, like, what would you do if you found out that what you enjoy right now in life was ill-gotten? How would you feel? That's a huge question. And what is it that they admire about the people who have formed this life for them? Is it the money? Of course, Brandon and I, we taught in a pretty affluent community. And I often wondered how, kids could adjust going to college and living in a little dorm room when they had these huge McMansions to live in here.
That's why dorm rooms are going away and they're all fancy
Yeah.
apartments now, but
Yeah.
that's a different
Right.
discussion.
Right. It is different. But, what would they do if they found out that wealth was gotten in an unethical way? There was a lot of unethical things happening in the 40s. Joe and Steve were not the only people who had a factory that was taking money. In fact, he was, you probably read this. Miller was inspired by a newspaper article.
Yes.
Up by Wright State in Dayton, Ohio, where a daughter turned her father in. And so that's what really inspired this story.
Yeah.
Is, because it's not just the war profiteering, it's the family standing up against it, that breaking that family loyalty in order to do the bigger thing.
And I had read that. And what's interesting is what you just said in the context of this discussion brings me back to, you talked about the context of the Vietnam War versus the context of this war, World War II. And, here this people turning these people in because the World War II was a patriotic endeavor. And then in Vietnam, almost the families that were lionized for protecting their children because that war was not seen as through the same lens. And I didn't have reason to think about that until just now in this context. And so I don't know what to do with it. It's just one of those things. This is all rough draft speech,
Well, maybe you'll write a play.
Maybe, because I've got all the time to do that. Right.
Right. Exactly.
Exactly. So no, I'm glad you came back to that because I think it's really, really interesting. And, I even think about this in terms of something like the, not to take it political, but I'm going to take it to the news and something like what's going on with the January 6th hearings and people who have turned people in that they saw in videos and in pictures and on social media were there doing things. And so it's like, oh, I know that person. And they call their sheriff or they call the FBI and tell on them. And then those people end up getting arrested. But then the segment of the population who feels like, well, no, that person was doing their patriotic duty.
Right.
And so I see that tension here in the same in the play as well. And I think the kids would really eat that up.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah. So, yeah.
Great. So let me come back to something kind of, we'll just go out in the left field and we'll come back for a moment. You said something really interesting earlier that I wrote down about the pathos of this play and of tragedies. And you talked about yourself writing comedy. And I'd like, that's so fascinating to me. Do you think that in writing comedy, you have to be tuned in to what could also be the pathos of that play? Like if it wasn't a comedy, how it would go wrong. And that's how you make it stay a comedy. Is my question making sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, every joke has a tragic truth to it, I think. And, I know lots of stand-up comics and for the better part of them, they're not always happy people.
Yeah. we always hear those tragedies about people like Robin
Mitch
Williams.
Hedberg.
Mitch Hedberg. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
I don't know if you saw Bo Burnham's special
Yes.
that
Oh,
came out during
yes.
COVID. And
So
I have
heartbreaking.
never been more challenged by something in TV wise. I just didn't know what to do.
Absolutely.
I mean, it was
I
so
know.
up and down, but did such a good job of capturing that zeitgeist of COVID, I think. So,
Yeah,
oh, great. Yeah,
exactly.
we could do another whole
Exactly.
conversation on that. He's a
Yeah.
genius.
Yeah.
So,
Another thing I wanted to talk about with All My Sons is the fact that it's a family drama.
mm,
There's a lot of drama in most families.
mm-hmm,
Um, and the whole play takes place in the Keller's backyard. I think that's really significant. It doesn't take place in the front yard where neighbors can see it. It's in the backyard. It's in your private place. And the people who come into that backyard are
mm-hmm,
invited in or they're
mm-hmm.
close neighbors, but there really isn't anybody except, well, Steve Devers, who's in jail because he wasn't as savvy as Joe. And Kate Keller, his wife, was complicit. She knows everything,
Yeah.
but everything's secret. Everything's in the cellar. Everything is in the, and I think I read one time that Keller comes from the word cellar.
Well, we
Everything is,
we could ask the Keller that you and I both know and see he would know.
yeah, you would know, right?
Yeah, Chuck Keller would definitely know that, I think. But yeah, so I should have thought about setting as much as I talk with teachers I work with about
Yeah,
looking
yeah.
at setting and how characters are in their setting, and I hadn't gotten there yet. And I'd like to think I would have, but that's absolutely
Hmm.
right. Now I had noticed that it all takes place on a Sunday morning, which was as equally interesting to me.
Right. And did you notice that the acts get darker and darker? The
Oh
sun goes
yeah,
away. So it
yeah.
starts out like morning and then twilight and then 2 o'clock in the morning is
Yeah.
act three.
Yeah. And I noticed like
Yeah.
on the first I noticed that in comparison to like the first line, first page, um, when
Yeah. Just
find it
fluff.
here. It's
That first page, that conversation with the neighbor about the newspaper.
yeah, and he says it's all bad. Oh, yeah. Frank says, um, that beautiful, not a cloud as he looks up at the sky.
Yeah.
And
Not a
so
cloud.
yeah, at the beginning, there's no cloud. But by the end of the play, it's all
It's all
dark and
clouded.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
So, oh, that's
Exactly.
great. Yeah. Um, so, what do you think it is about Miller or the text that we don't know, that you think is really important? So you've taught it, you've done some research on it, and you're thinking about it. What is something you've come across that you think, hey, this is something that people often overlook or don't know about the play or about the author, that when they do, things get different. Maybe it's something we've already talked about.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I know what I wonder about, and
Mm-hmm.
because I always wonder what happened after the play closed. What happens to that family after the play is over?
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder why Joe killed himself. Was it to avoid shame, or was it to redeem himself in some illogical way? Because he could have redeemed himself in a better way. He could have done what his wife said. Turn yourself in, do your time,
Yeah.
like Steve Devers is.
Mm-hmm.
But he couldn't do that. He couldn't face the fact that, I love when Kate says, if Larry's not alive, then your father killed him. It's like that line just, and that's
Yeah.
when Chris understands. And I think Chris always knew. Don't you think?
Yeah. Yeah. I
I mean,
do.
his father was convicted. The only reason
Mm-hmm.
he didn't stay in jail is because he won on appeal,
Yeah.
you know. So
Mm-hmm.
he was in jail just like Steve for a while, and that's why the newspaper article made its way over to Larry.
Well, and that evokes something in me too, because I wasn't left wondering why Joe killed himself, though I am now, and you did that to me, so thanks. But um, I was also wondering, there at the end, like I felt like Chris knew, because of the indictment and things, and it's not like Chris could be upset when it's out in the open. It's not like Chris could be, because he'd always known. But then I
Mhm.
also thought about Annie, and Annie hadn't always known, but
She'd known,
but
but she
she
did know because
she
of the letter. Yeah.
she knew that Larry killed himself.
Yeah.
And so even though it's easy to see, almost see her as the victim here in a way, she's doing just what the others are doing. She's keeping something. She's got a secret. She's not sharing a piece of information. And I don't know what to do with it yet. I haven't had enough time to think about it. And this is where those valuable discussions with
Hmm.
students are so
Right.
useful, because they often
Right. I
help you
love when
flush it
teachers
out.
en engage in discussion with their students when they do not know when they don't have an answer. That's the best kind of discussion to have with teenagers.
Yeah.
You know, I have observed some teachers who have the answer in their head when they ask the question to the students. And if they don't match the answer the teacher has in their head, it's pretty much ignored. You know, I hear a lot of teachers go, okay, and what else? You know, they just,
Yeah.
instead of saying the truth is, oh, I never thought about that. You know, you just
Yeah.
brought that, you just opened up a door for me.
Yeah. And all that ends up doing is um, the, the kid who gets it, they think they've learned the secret knock or something, that it takes. And I think it in conversation with you and with others, it encouraged me to try doing new text or new poems,
Mm-hmm.
something new every year that would prevent me from knowing it
Right,
so well that I'm looking for a
right.
particular thing, because it's hard to do sometimes.
And
Yeah.
you and I both taught AP English, and I mean, their insight into things sometimes went way beyond my insight, and I was fascinated.
Yeah. I know one of the things that I try to, when I'm working with teachers and with students, is that word expert. It kind of drives me crazy. I like the word scholar, but the word expert, is such a high expectation. But I say, expert and experience are cognate. And all an expert is a person who has a lot more experience with one particular thing. It doesn't mean that they are better than you or they're that much smarter than you. They just know something very, very particularly.
Right,
um, and to help students realize that they have a voice here, but also to help teachers realize that students have a voice here. So
right,
I think we're
right. The
yeah.
teacher is not the expert. There's experiences your students have had that you have never had.
Mhm.
And so therefore they have insight that you don't.
Yeah. And so when you're talking a family drama like this,
Mm-hmm.
everybody's got that family drama experience.
Everybody's got
Yeah.
that,
Mhm.
sure.
So speaking of that, because there's so many layers here, one of my favorite questions to ask is, what is easy to miss or dismiss in this play? You think, oh, okay, that doesn't matter. It's something small, or you only get it after reading or seeing it that third or fourth time, and you're like, got
Mm-hmm.
it.
I think people miss the significance of little Bert, because little Bert is really the only one that Joe can truly fool, you know,
Mm-hmm.
because he's a child and he's fascinated by the fact that Joe is in jail and that he's built this imaginary jail in his cellar and that he owns a gun. And that always reminds me of Chekhov's theory about guns, though
Yep.
if you're going to bring it up, it's got to be fired sometime,
That's right.
Yeah. And that Bert is, on the he's on the lookout for bad guys. He's basically McCarthy himself as a little child. He's out in the neighborhood finding out, tattling, finding out all the bad people in the neighborhood. And
Mm-hmm.
Joe is encouraging that. And Kate hates it. She goes, I wish you wouldn't do that, because she knows the truth. She knows that he was in jail for a just reason and he's out on pure luck.
Yeah.
He says when he got off the bus that day, he came back from he purposely walked through the neighborhood waving like he was in some kind of parade. And
Yeah.
even the neighbor says, some people even admire him for getting away with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Not wanting to take what you just said about admiring them to get away with it. and linking it to a political figure today. I'm not going to do that, but I am going to say it's very interesting to me that when Bert is first introduced, and I'm sure it's just the way it was printed in the book that I have, but I don't think it's coincidental in the structure of the play, is right past that part where Joe is calling Chris out for always looking at the books. And Chris says, I like to keep abreast of my ignorance. Like ignoring, like, what are you ignoring, Chris? And eventually we figure it out. And then
and also when Joe says that line, I ignore what I got to ignore.
That's right. That's right.
He
Yes.
says that, yeah, exactly.
And then, but right after Chris says that, Bert comes in and he's walking around the tree and, what happened to the tree? What's the tree mean? And yeah, I love looking at that character, and it's an important minor character.
It is.
I think it's great. And then right before Bert leaves, Keller says, and mom's the word, Bert.
Yep. Mom's the word.
Oh, it's good. It's good. So I often ask about what makes it so complex or so complicated, but we've done a lot of that already. But is there anything else that you'd like to address as far as this play and something that makes it especially complicated when we think about big L literature, like something we really have to put a lot of thought into?
Well, I think there are still layers that we haven't talked about.
Go for it.
We haven't talked about the doctor next door. His wife just wants him to make money and he wants to do something for the world. He wants to be charitable and be a missionary doctor or whatever. And it's just that whole layer of what do you owe the world? What do you how responsible are you? And we're thinking about, like, in today, we see so many people don't even vote, which is the very least that you can do to do something is to vote. And so many people I know and admire in every other way say, I don't vote. I think, well, then you must not like democracy if you don't vote, Why wouldn't you? So, and I know, I remember one time, and I know you probably had students who said this to you. I'd love to be a teacher, but I just couldn't live on that salary. And I would tell them, my husband and I are both teachers. We live just fine. We don't live like rich people because we're not, but we're just fine.
Yeah.
But then, now I work for University of the Cumberlands, and now I see people who have done other jobs and gotten discouraged. And so later in life, they decide, I did want to be a teacher. I do want to be a teacher. And now they've gone back to be a teacher.
Yeah.
But, if these teenagers are, the hardest question I used to ask my seniors is, how many of you are going to college? They'd all raise their hands. And I would just say, and why? Why are you going to college? And they were so unnerved by that question. And when they were honest, they would say, it's expected of me. A few of them went to college without knowing what they were going to study in college. And so they were really unnerved by that question.
Yeah. Some
Some people, though, knew exactly why they were going to college. They knew exactly what goal they had, and they were heading towards it. I think about one of my students, Joe, who went into the service right at, and he had wonderful grades. He went into the service. Everybody thought he was crazy, but he said he had a sense of responsibility. So he went into the service.
I remember I was a senior in college when, I was a super senior because I did 5 years undergrad. I changed majors twice. Started as a nursing major. Teri, did you know that? I was a nursing major at the beginning.
I did not know that. I was about to ask you, but I thought they'd probably edit that out.
Oh, I don't mind. No, it's fine. No, they, I started as a it was my senior year, and 9/11 happened. And I was very close because I'd almost joined the military out of high school and didn't, and was very close to doing it and saying, I just feel like I need to contribute. My grandfather did, and both my grandfathers did, and I had family who had. And I remember a very good friend of mine at the time, said, well, you want to be a teacher. And it seems to me that a teacher is contributing in their own way. And in a way, contributing more because you're affecting those people who are going to become, who are the future. And that really stuck with me,
Yeah.
to this
Yeah.
discussion. If I think about it in the context of this book, you as a teacher, other people as a teacher have almost done more for the country than Joe Keller ever could have,
Mm.
with what he does in this book.
I
You know,
think you probably have had experience similar to mine where students that you taught long ago contact you to tell you that you did influence them,
yeah.
that they still think about. This is the craziest thing on every parent night. I would say I only have two rules in my classroom: be present, be pleasant. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I saw Nick Smith, after he'd been in New York for a long time, he
Yeah.
said he lives by that motto in his everyday life: be present, be pleasant. And I thought, well, that's not even the context in which I used it. I used it about being in the classroom, but he
Yeah.
took it as how you should live your life.
Yeah. That's great. I have a student now who's teaching high school. And one of the things I would tell, especially when I taught seniors, I'd say, I'll treat you like an adult until you give me a reason not to.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that he teaches high school kids, and he will tell them that. He said, I'll treat you like an adult until you give me a reason not to. So yeah, I guess you never think about the things that are going
Yeah.
to stick, I don't
Yeah.
guess.
Right. So
So
you just didn't just teach your students, you taught his students too,
I know that's a
because,
great point. It's a great point.
you know,
So, so I was thinking to go back to what we were saying about,
yes.
you were saying about the neighbors. I do think a lot about why certain characters are in there. I thought about Bert. I thought about the neighbors, and I kept thinking of the neighbors as almost in a way a foil for Joe. Like, here's Joe. Tell me what you think on this take. Here's Joe as somebody who very much could have had done a great deal of good during the war, chose not to, could have done the right thing after the war, chose not to. And then here's the doctor who wants to, but can't, or feels like he can't for
Mm-hmm.
whatever reason. And so I immediately thought of it as that foil character. That might be oversimplifying it, but that's probably how I would start pinging that with kids. What do you
Yeah.
think of that take?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. That's a good foil.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think that students would say, why doesn't he want to be a doctor? I mean, that's a great thing to be. Well, there's all kinds of doctors. There's
Mm-hmm.
doctors who just make a lot of money, and there's missionary doctors, and
Yeah.
and but his wife was really downplaying his social conscience,
Yeah.
you
For the
know,
sake of money, and she
for
always
the
thought he
sake
was,
of money.
and
And
she always thought he
just,
was cheating on her. I mean, you know, yeah. Great. Well, Terry, this has just been wonderful. There's so much to think about coming out of this. I almost want to do a follow up on this after I've had some more time to think about it, and things. And so, thank you for this. And I think there'll definitely be some teachers who uh, consider this text, if they
oh, I
hadn't
hope
already.
so. I hope so.
I like to end this with some questions about what you're reading or writing or researching right now. And you said you're working on a play. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about
I
it,
would love to talk a
but
little
I'd
bit
love
about
to hear
that.
what you're reading too, if you're reading anything right now.
Um, well, I'm reading this textbook. You and I are both reading
Oh,
because we're
that's right.
writing for the
We are
textbook.
working on that together, aren't
So,
we?
but
Yeah.
but I'm really enjoying that because it's been a long time since I've read such good literature,
Good.
and I think those selections are wonderful in that
Mm-hmm.
textbook. So I'm having a great time reading that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I am writing a play called 11,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a play that honestly was inspired by Jill Stellar and Lindsay Stellar's mother.
Mm-hmm. A former student of
Who,
ours, right? Yeah.
yes, student of ours, who one day told me when I was telling her, how did you raise such a beautiful, wonderful daughter? Because I admired Lindsay, I still do so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, she never panders to popular opinion. She doesn't try to be popular. She's just well liked because she's such a good person. And she seems to know who she is. And she said, well, I've always told Lindsay that when she got confused about what she wanted to do or who she really was, that she should look back at when she was 11 and think about the things that she liked to do, the things she was drawn to, the way she felt about things, before puberty and before all the peer pressure happened and all that. She goes, I always tell her to go back to when she was 11.
Oh, I love it.
So that stayed with me for so long. And then I started looking online and I just looked up quotes about being 11. I found all these celebrities talking about major decisions and things that happened in their lives when they were 11. And then I read some psychology about how 11 is like the perfect age where you are truly yourself. When you're 11, even though you don't know yourself entirely yet, you're so true to yourself when you're 11. And then I started asking people, tell me stories about when you were 11. And I got the most fascinating stories. In fact, one of them was from Joe Fitzgerald, my student who went into the service. And it was about learning to play golf when he was 11 and being finally invited to go on a golfing trip with his uncles and his father. And he felt like he finally had arrived. He said he didn't have to go to fudge shops and t-shirt shops anymore. He got to go on the kind of vacation he liked and play golf every day.
Oh, that's great.
And his father would tell him all Joe wanted to do was just get up there and hit the ball as hard as he could. And then he would get impatient when the men would take such a long time with their stroke, and how they would prepare it and look at it from every angle and all that. And he would say, hurry up, I just want my turn again. He was just a kid. And his father said, prepare and plan and then execute. Prepare, plan, and execute. And then he went into the service and became a bomb tech. And he said everything that his father taught him was plan and prepare and execute.
Yeah.
And he said he came back, he was over in Afghanistan 3 times. And he came back the first time and he had definitely PTSD. And he found golf again and he taught his roommate how to play golf so that he would have someone to play with. And all of a sudden it all came back to him, all that story that his father told him. And his last line, and I use it word for word in the play, is that I guess people think I became a man in the military, but I think it really happened on the golf course. And it was just like, such a perfect ending to that story. And I have 63 people so far have contributed their 11 stories to me. And so right now I am trying to write the play.
Well, Teri,
it'll be a kind of like a chorus line, where everybody has a story to tell,
Yeah. Are you doing it as like a series of monologues, kind of? Is that how you're doing
it's
it?
monologue. Some of them are monologues. Others of them are the whole group, all 11 people in the cast get involved and become the other voices in the story. And then sometimes it's just a scene between 2 people. And then at the very end, they all talk about what they would tell their 11-year-old self if they could. And I also intend when it's produced to ask the audience that same thing before the play begins. They'll put them all in a hat and pick out, and then they'll read 11 different stories of advice from the audience. So it'll be a little bit involved with audience involvement.
What's your timeline like?
I have written 62 pages of an 80-page play. So
nice.
Yeah. So in September, all of September, the Kentucky Theater Association has their new play contest for full-length plays. And so my goal is to have it done by the end of September so I can send it into that contest.
Nice. Well, I look forward, please let me know when it's finished and how things go.
And please let me know
I'll
if
follow.
you have an 11 story to tell me.
I probably have a few now that I think back on it and everything that was going on when I was 11. More to the point, I am a father of a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old. And you got me thinking about what sort of life my 12-year-old had when he was 11. I think he was pretty happy.
Somebody told me that. Somebody said you ought to have a young person in the cast who's telling stories about someone who's just 12 or 13 or 14,
Yeah.
looking back at 11.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think he would have had a pretty good perspective, but I can't say for sure. But I'm thinking about that as a father too. So it's something to think about. But yeah. So the only thing, I usually share at this point too something I'm reading, and I didn't want to start anything new. Well, I didn't want to start anything this summer that I would have to dive into deeply, being brand new. I knew I was reading All My Sons for the first time. And so I found, when I was boxing some books for a move, I came across a book that I'd read in graduate school, but I'd overlooked it a lot when I read it because there was just so much going on in graduate school. I've been spending some time with, I don't know if you're familiar with Anne Carson, the poet.
I'm not.
And
wait a minute. I think,
yeah,
I do know that name.
Yeah, this is
the
autobiography of Red, and it's a novel in verse. And it is just really beautiful. It's the voice is it's going to sound very science fiction-y, but it's not really. The voice is this young monster, and he's got these red wings, and that's where the red comes from. But it's the only analogy I could give to it would be like a Grendel type thing, but that's not doing it justice. This is much more poetic because it is in verse, and so it's got me thinking lots of different things. But it's also so accessible. I mean, it's not real dense text on the page, so you can think about the words that are in it. So I'm recommending that to people. If you get a chance to read it, let me know what you think of it. But it's pretty neat. So
wonderful.
Well, Teri, thank you again for agreeing to do this.
Well, thank you. I wasn't nearly as nervous as I thought I would be.
Well, good. You shouldn't have been. Right. And I think it was fantastic to have this conversation.